You don't need more motivation. You don't need stronger willpower. And you don't need to punish yourself for what has already happened. If constant pleasure has weakened your mind, it did not happen because you are careless, lazy, or undisciplined. It happened because your brain learned a pattern that rewards relief over effort, comfort over resistance, stimulation over stillness. And once the brain learns this pattern, it repeats it automatically. This means something important. What was learned can be unlearned, but not through force, not through sudden discipline, not through extreme routines, and not through fighting desire head-on. Because the brain does not respond to pressure the way the ego expects it to. It responds to environment, to timing, to gradual rewiring. This audiobook is not about quitting pleasure. It is about changing the relationship your nervous system has with it. About teaching the brain how to feel stable without constant stimulation. How to tolerate silence without anxiety. How to return to effort without resistance. Most people try to fix the surface. They control behavior while ignoring the system underneath. That is why they relapse. Here we do the opposite. We rebuild the system first. Because when the system changes, behavior follows naturally. What you are about to hear is not a trick, not a hack, not a shortcut. It is the slow psychological process by which the brain regains strength. And when the brain regains strength, pleasure loses control without being fought. The brain does not break because of pleasure. It breaks because pleasure arrives without effort. This distinction matters more than most people realize. Effort is not just physical work. Effort is neural engagement. It is the signal that tells the brain, this action matters. When pleasure bypasses effort repeatedly, the brain begins to associate reward with passivity. And passivity over time weakens the entire motivational architecture. So retraining the brain does not begin with restriction. It begins with reintroducing effort in small, controlled doses. Not force, not extremes, but deliberate friction. The nervous system cannot be shocked back into strength. It must be guided. This is why people who suddenly quit all pleasures often fail. They remove stimulation faster than the nervous system can adapt. The result is anxiety, irritability, and eventual relapse. Retraining works in the opposite direction. You do not remove pleasure. You delay it. Delay is the first form of strength. When you delay gratification even slightly, the brain experiences something new. Tension without collapse. That tension is not harmful. It is developmental. Every time you stay with that tension, the brain relearns stability. This is the first repair. The second repair is silence exposure. A pleasure-conditioned mind fears silence not because silence is painful, but because silence removes distraction. And distraction has been doing the work of emotional regulation. So silence feels like loss. But silence is not emptiness. It is unstructured space. And unstructured space is where the brain regains coherence. This is why even a few minutes of intentional quiet each day begins to feel grounding after resistance passes. At first, the mind rebels. Thoughts accelerate. Restlessness appears. This is not failure. This is detox. The brain is recalibrating its baseline. Neuroscience shows that overstimulated dopamine circuits slowly resensitize when stimulation is reduced without panic. Key word: without panic. Panic tells the brain it is unsafe. Safety is required for rewiring. So the practice is not sit in silence and suffer. The practice is sit in silence and observe. Observation without judgment stabilizes the nervous system. This is how awareness replaces compulsion. Another critical repair is effort before reward. Not in life in general. In daily structure, when effort precedes pleasure, even in small ways, the brain begins to reassign value. Effort stops feeling pointless. Reward stops feeling hollow. This is not discipline in the traditional sense. It is pattern correction. The brain is a prediction machine. It predicts outcomes based on past sequences. If the sequence has been pleasure, relief, avoidance, we must slowly introduce effort, engagement, satisfaction. Satisfaction is not pleasure. It is deeper, quieter, more stable. Satisfaction strengthens identity. Pleasure weakens it when overused. Another underestimated repair is physical stillness. A restless mind often lives in a restless body. Small practices of stillness, standing, sitting, walking slowly, signal safety to the nervous system. Safety reduces compulsive seeking. This is why disciplined people often appear calm rather than intense. Calm is not absence of energy. It is contained energy. Contained energy is power. As the brain retrains, something subtle begins to return. Focus lengthens. Decisions feel lighter. The need for constant stimulation weakens. Not dramatically, gradually. This gradual return is important because strength that returns slowly is stable. The brain begins to trust itself again. And self-trust is the foundation of authority. Authority is not dominance. It is internal alignment. When the brain knows it can tolerate discomfort without escaping, confidence no longer depends on mood. This is where real change becomes noticeable. You stop negotiating with impulses. They still appear, but they no longer command. This is not suppression. It is deprioritization. The brain learns. This sensation is not urgent. Urgency is what gave pleasure its power. Remove urgency and pleasure loses control. Another key repair is single-task engagement. Multitasking fragments attention and reinforces dopamine instability. When you do one thing fully, even something small, the brain relearns coherence. Coherence restores energy. Energy does not come from stimulation. It comes from integration. This is why, after focused effort, people feel tired but fulfilled. After pleasure, they feel stimulated but empty. The difference matters. Over weeks of retraining, identity begins to shift. You stop seeing yourself as someone who is trying to control urges. You begin to feel like someone who has space between impulse and action. That space is freedom. Freedom is not doing whatever you want. It is choosing without compulsion. This is the point where desire stops feeling like an enemy, because you are no longer fighting it. You are outgrowing it. As the brain begins to stabilize, something unexpected happens. You don't suddenly become disciplined. You don't feel like a new person overnight. There is no dramatic shift in personality. Instead, there is less internal noise. Thoughts stop competing for attention. Urges lose their urgency. Decisions require less emotional effort. This is how recovery actually feels. Quiet. Most people expect retraining to feel empowering in a loud way. They expect confidence to surge, motivation to spike, energy to explode. But the brain does not heal through excitement. It heals through regulation. Regulation is subtle. And because it is subtle, many people miss it. They think nothing is happening. But internally, the nervous system is reorganizing. When stimulation is no longer constant, the brain begins to rebuild baseline dopamine sensitivity. This means ordinary activities start to feel meaningful again. Reading becomes tolerable. Listening becomes engaging. Work feels less heavy, not because life changed, but because the mind stopped demanding constant reward. One of the most important shifts during retraining is the return of temporal patience. A pleasure-conditioned mind lives only in the present moment, not in awareness, but in urgency. It wants relief now, distraction now, comfort now. Retraining stretches the time horizon. The brain relearns how to wait without anxiety. Waiting is not passive. It is an active neurological skill. Every time you wait without seeking stimulation, you are telling the brain, "This moment is survivable." That message accumulates, and as it accumulates, the fear of boredom dissolves. Boredom was never the enemy. It was the doorway. Beyond boredom lies clarity. But clarity only appears when the mind stops running. Another key change during retraining is the restoration of emotional proportion. Overstimulated minds overreact. Small frustrations feel large. Minor discomforts feel unbearable. Delays feel personal. As regulation returns, reactions soften. Not because you stop caring, but because your nervous system is no longer overloaded. This is why people who regain control often appear calmer under pressure. They are not suppressing emotion. They are processing it efficiently. Efficiency is strength. This is also where self-respect begins to return. Self-respect is not built by achievement alone. It is built when the mind proves to itself that it can act deliberately. Every time you choose effort over escape, even briefly, you deposit trust into your own system. Trust compounds, and trust stabilizes identity. This is why discipline becomes easier over time. Not because you push harder, but because the brain no longer resists effort. Resistance was never about laziness. It was about overload. Remove overload and resistance fades. As retraining continues, pleasure begins to change its role. It no longer dominates the emotional landscape. It becomes contextual. Enjoyment returns to its proper place, as enhancement, not replacement. This is where people finally understand something important. Pleasure itself was never the problem. Dependency was. When pleasure is no longer needed to feel okay, can be enjoyed without cost. The mind stops clinging, stops chasing, stops bargaining. And in that absence of clinging, freedom appears. Freedom does not announce itself. Feels like steadiness. You wake up without immediately reaching for stimulation. You can sit with a thought without escaping it. You can work without constantly needing relief. These moments are small, but they are decisive. They mark the return of inner leadership. Leadership over the self is not forceful. It is quiet. It does not argue with impulses. It does not negotiate endlessly. Simply acts. An action taken without inner conflict restores authority. This is why people who retrain their brains often feel something they cannot explain. A sense of alignment. Life feels less fragmented, less reactive, more intentional, not perfect, not rigid, just stable. Stability is the foundation of all long-term strength. Without it, discipline collapses, focus scatters, purpose fades. With it, even ordinary effort becomes meaningful. As the brain continues to adapt, you begin to notice a shift in how you relate to discomfort. Discomfort stops feeling threatening. It becomes informative. Instead of fleeing it, you observe it. And observation dissolves its power. This is the final stage before integration. The stage where the mind no longer asks, "How do I avoid this?" but instead asks, "What is this teaching me?" That question marks maturity. And maturity is the end goal of retraining. Not control, not suppression, but capacity. The capacity to remain present, to remain deliberate, to remain whole. At this stage of retraining, something important becomes clear. You are no longer fixing yourself. You are inhabiting yourself again. The mind stops feeling like something you must manage constantly. It begins to feel like a place you can stay. This is the difference between control and integration. Control requires effort. Integration reduces effort. Most people fail because they aim for control without rebuilding capacity. Capacity is the ability to hold experience without fragmenting. And capacity grows slowly. One of the clearest signs that retraining is working is the return of natural rhythm. You start noticing cycles again. Effort followed by rest. Focus followed by release. Engagement followed by satisfaction. These rhythms were lost when pleasure flattened everything into one constant state. Constant stimulation destroys rhythm. Rhythm restores life. This is why days begin to feel more structured without strict planning. Your nervous system starts guiding behavior instead of reacting to impulse. This guidance is subtle. You feel when it's time to stop. You feel when it's time to continue. You feel when something is enough. Enough is a word pleasure-conditioned minds forget. They chase more because the internal signal for completion is broken. Retraining repairs that signal. When the brain regains the ability to feel enough, compulsive seeking fades naturally. Not through resistance, but through satisfaction. This satisfaction is not excitement. It is quiet fullness. And quiet fullness does not demand replacement. Another shift appears here. Time stops feeling compressed. Pleasure collapses time into urgency. Everything feels immediate. Retraining expands time. You no longer feel rushed internally, even when life is busy. This internal spaciousness changes how you experience stress. Stress becomes a condition, not an identity. You experience pressure without becoming pressure. This separation is crucial. It allows the mind to stay organized under demand. This is why people who retrain their brains often appear calm even when challenged. They are not detached. They are contained. Containment is the ability to hold intensity without spilling it everywhere. Pleasure removes containment. Discipline without regulation creates rigidity. Retraining creates balance. As balance stabilizes, self-perception changes. You stop narrating yourself as someone trying to improve. You simply act from clarity. The internal commentary softens. Less self-judgment, less negotiation, less inner conflict. Conflict was never your nature. It was a symptom of overload. As overload dissolves, coherence returns. Coherence is when thoughts, emotions, and actions align. Alignment creates confidence without performance. This is why people who regain inner stability often speak less but with more weight. They don't need to convince. They are settled. Settled minds are persuasive without trying. This is inner authority returning, not as dominance, not as control over others, but as presence that does not bend easily. Presence is not loud. It is unmistakable. At this point, pleasure no longer feels like something you must manage. It becomes something you choose or ignore without tension. Choice without tension is freedom. Freedom is not the absence of desire. It is the absence of compulsion. And compulsion disappears when the brain no longer equates stimulation with safety. Safety now comes from within, from the knowledge that you can remain with experience, pleasant or unpleasant, without losing yourself. This knowledge is deeply stabilizing. It anchors identity. You begin to trust your responses again. Trust restores momentum. Momentum does not come from motivation. It comes from consistency without strain. This is why, over time, people who retrain their brains do not feel like they are constantly working on themselves. Self-improvement becomes self-maintenance. Maintenance is sustainable. You don't burn out maintaining alignment. You only burn out fighting yourself. As integration continues, something almost paradoxical happens. Life becomes simpler, but richer. You enjoy fewer things, but enjoy them more deeply. Depth replaces quantity. Depth always wins, because depth nourishes. Quantity exhausts. This is the final transformation pleasure-conditioned minds undergo. They stop seeking intensity. They start valuing depth. Depth supports meaning, and meaning supports endurance. Endurance is the quiet power that carries you through long stretches of life without collapse. This is what retraining ultimately gives you. Not perfection, not immunity to struggle, but stability that survives change. What most people don't understand about retraining the brain is that the brain does not change once and remain changed. It negotiates. At first, when stimulation is reduced and effort is reintroduced, the nervous system cooperates. Focus improves. Calm returns. Clarity stabilizes. And this creates a dangerous illusion. The illusion that the work is finished. But the brain is conservative by nature. It prefers familiar patterns, even harmful ones, over unfamiliar stability. So after weeks or months, the old circuits begin to whisper again. Not loudly, not urgently, quietly. A thought like, "You're doing well now. One indulgence won't hurt." This is not weakness. This is neural memory. Dopamine pathways that were reinforced for years do not disappear. They become dormant. Dormant circuits wait for opportunity. This is why relapse rarely happens during stress alone. It often happens during comfort. When vigilance relaxes, the brain tests the old route. And this is where long-term retraining truly begins. Not when desire is loud, but when it is subtle. At this stage, strength is not about saying no. It is about recognition without engagement. You notice the pull, you acknowledge it, and you do nothing. Doing nothing is harder than resisting. Resistance creates friction. Friction creates drama. Non-engagement dissolves the loop. This is how the brain finally learns that pleasure is optional. Optionality is power. When pleasure is optional, it stops defining behavior. Another long-term shift occurs here: dopamine recalibration. Over time, the baseline level of satisfaction rises. This is not happiness. It is neural sufficiency. The brain no longer demands constant peaks because its baseline is no longer depleted. This is why ordinary days begin to feel okay. Not exciting, not dull, just stable. Stability is the signal that retraining is working. But stability also introduces a new challenge. Without constant stimulation, the mind begins to ask deeper questions. Questions that were previously drowned out. Questions about direction, about purpose, about identity. This is where many people become uncomfortable again. Because pleasure didn't just numb fatigue. It numbed existential pressure. When pleasure fades, meaning demands attention, and meaning requires commitment. This is the second layer of retraining: identity reconstruction. You begin to see yourself differently, not as someone fighting impulses, but as someone capable of choosing direction. Direction is heavier than desire. Desire is momentary. Direction is sustained. As identity stabilizes, decision-making changes. You no longer decide based on what feels good now. You decide based on what maintains alignment. Alignment becomes the internal reference point. This is why mature strength looks boring to outsiders. There is no excess, no chaos, no dramatic swings, just consistency. Consistency creates trust. First internal trust, then external trust. People begin to respond to you differently, not because you demand respect, but because you no longer leak uncertainty. Uncertainty was never visible in words. It was visible in hesitation. As hesitation disappears, authority appears. This authority is quiet. It does not assert. It does not explain itself. Simply acts. An action taken without internal conflict is persuasive. This is the third layer, life integration. Now the question is no longer how to avoid pleasure, but how to place it correctly within a disciplined life. Pleasure is reintroduced deliberately, not as escape, not as compensation, but as enhancement. Work has edges again. Rest has meaning again. Silence has value again. You begin to enjoy effort itself, not masochistically, but because effort confirms capability. Capability confirms identity, and identity stabilizes life. At this stage, boredom no longer threatens you. Boredom becomes space. Space becomes clarity. clarity becomes direction. This is where ambition returns, not frantic, not desperate, but grounded. You stop chasing outcomes. You commit to processes. Processes create outcomes naturally. This is the final sign of full retraining. When you stop managing the mind and begin trusting it. Trust does not mean indulgence. It means confidence in restraint, confidence in patience, confidence in staying. At this depth, pleasure loses its psychological leverage entirely, can no longer negotiate with you, because you are no longer living at the surface of your impulses. You are living from structure. Structure is freedom, not rigid structure, but internal order. And internal order is what allows a human being to move through life without constant collapse. There comes a point where the struggle ends, not because desire disappears, but because it no longer defines you. You stop asking how to control the mind. You stop negotiating with impulses. You stop measuring progress in days or streaks. Instead, something quieter takes place. You recognize that the mind was never meant to be dominated. It was meant to be understood, trained, and trusted. What weakened you was not pleasure itself, but the absence of structure around it. What drained you was not comfort, but the loss of effort that once gave comfort meaning. What scattered you was not stimulation, but living without internal order. And internal order is not created through force. It is created when the brain relearns three things: that it can tolerate discomfort, that it does not need constant reward to feel safe, and that presence is stronger than escape. Once these lessons are learned, something irreversible happens. The mind stops panicking in silence. It stops collapsing under boredom. It stops seeking relief at the first sign of tension. Not because tension vanished, but because you learned to stay. Staying is the core skill everything else depends on. When you can stay with effort, you regain discipline without strain. When you can stay with silence, clarity returns. When you can stay with uncertainty, direction forms naturally. This is why real strength never looks aggressive. It looks settled. A settled mind does not rush. It does not prove. It does not perform. It moves deliberately. This deliberateness is what people feel as presence. This presence is what becomes authority. Not authority over others, but authority over your own direction. At this stage, pleasure no longer threatens you. It has been demoted. It no longer runs your schedule, your energy, or your attention. It becomes a visitor, not a ruler. And when pleasure loses its throne, meaning quietly takes its place. Meaning does not shout. It does not rush you. It does not demand stimulation. Meaning feels like alignment. You wake up without resistance. You work without inner chaos. You rest without guilt. Life does not become easy, but it becomes coherent. Coherence is what most people are missing. They mistake excitement for fulfillment. They mistake comfort for peace. They mistake distraction for rest. But peace comes from stability. Fulfillment comes from effort aligned with values. And rest comes from a mind that is no longer running from itself. What you rebuilt here was not discipline in the harsh sense. You rebuilt capacity. The capacity to endure. The capacity to focus. The capacity to choose without compulsion. This capacity is what allows a human being to live deeply without burning out. And once it returns, it stays, as long as you continue to respect effort, silence, and structure. There is no final victory over desire. There is only maturity beyond it. You are no longer trying to escape pleasure. You are no longer afraid of it. You simply no longer need it to feel whole. And that is the quiet moment where strength becomes permanent. This is where the work ends, and where life finally begins again.